My name is Gautam Bhan. I'm part of the faculty at IHS. And I teach basically two core things at IHS. I teach as part of the curriculum on core questions of urban inequality, particularly social relations and social power in urban cities. So questions of identity centered around questions of community, caste, religion, gender. And I also teach our core courses on infrastructure. And in the electives, I teach on housing and I teach on urban theory. And in the skill lab, I teach in research design and I teach qualitative methods. So like a lot of us who you'll meet as faculty at the program, we sort of keep showing up at different parts of the program because that's kind of the way a team taught program is structured. You don't have discrete faculty for discrete courses where you come, take the course, and you never see them again for the rest of the program. I think that is one of the things that's quite distinctive about teaching at IHS, that we teach together. You'll see quite a bit of time where you'll have multiple faculty in the room. We enjoy quite a bit not agreeing with what we teach. We try and present that disagreement in a way that's productive, but we think it's very important. It also sort of holds in many ways the question of how one actually structures an interdisciplinary curriculum. So for a few minutes, let me tell you a little bit about the years we spent designing curriculum at IHS. Our big question was to say, how should you balance the training of a set of urban practitioners between an employment and practice world that is entirely organized by sector? You do housing, transport, sanitation, economic development, as very separate kind of professional fields on the one hand, and a disciplinary world that takes its disciplinary training very seriously. You are an architect, a planner, a lawyer, an economist, a sociologist, an anthropologist. And one of the big questions for us is that we both believe that both this professional silo and this disciplinary silo were partly the reasons why we were unable to really engage with cities. My own educational background is very similar to the kind that many faculty in IHS have. We all tend to have multiple degrees. And we have multiple degrees in very different disciplines. And one of the reasons we're like that is actually because we keep trying to struggle to bridge these divides in different kinds of ways. I entered my undergraduate as an economist and got deeply frustrated with a lot of the structure of way economics was taught. And I realized that I would constantly talk about what was outside economic theory as something that I just called politics. Right? So politics essentially was the name that you gave to everything you couldn't understand. It was politics. So people will say this constantly to you. We had the perfect plan and then politics ruined it. Things got political. And I found that very bizarre because it kind of imagined that the world had to look like economic theory and the actuality of the world was something we just called politics. So I started studying political science. And in many ways, that mixing gave me the first sense of what happens when you look at the same thing from two entirely different lenses. And then in my third year of college, I ran into one of my best teachers, actually, is a woman named Amrita Basu, who taught me feminist theory. And feminist theory didn't tell me to add gender to my politics and economics, as many people think feminist theory does. Feminist theory taught me how to think about power. And the minute you think about power, both as a method and as a concept, everything you study in economics and political science really begins to become very shaky. It also helped that she was also a political scientist, so she could also help me navigate that field. And when I went out to my master's, I ended up getting a second degree that says Master's in Interdisciplinary Studies. It's a bizarre kind of anxiety-inducing thing to have two degrees where what's written on your degree certificate doesn't really say anything. I think it certainly gave my parents more anxiety than it gave me. And when I went to my PhD, that was the only time I actually knew why I was going to study what I was going to study. For my bachelor's and my master's, I kind of just ended up in programs hunting for ways to think about things that I cared about. But when I went to planning, I went at that point to a university, I went to Berkeley, which both was beginning to think of something called Southern Urban Theory and was also kind of thinking about planning as something that was not physical and spatial planning. And in some way, that move to think about the urban beyond these distinctions of discipline and practice is what motivates the IHS curriculum. And the way we do it, and the way we've always done it, is to think about in many ways, what does it mean when you look at the city and work problem backward, workplace backward. What does it mean to think about disciplines, not as things you teach a canon of, here are core concepts in A, B, or C, economics, psychology, sociology, but that for every inquiry you have about the city, for every problem you're trying to solve in the city, for every neighborhood you're trying to understand, for every interaction you're trying to figure out, for every government you're trying to decode, you work backward from the problem and say, what do I need to know to understand this? And there's two parts to that question. The first is, you have to learn how to see. You have to learn how to look at a city and realize that it's asking you 1,000 questions. You have to learn to look at a crack in a pavement and say, what does this tell me about governance? You have to learn how to look at a flood in a central city neighborhood and ask what it tells you, not just about ecology, but about legality and informality and housing. You have to start looking at an incident of violence or a random act of kindness or the introduction of a meter into an auto or the introduction of an extra floor on a building. I can think of 100 things, right? Each one of those instincts that happen in this massive rush of simulation in what we call the urban around us, but that we don't know how to turn into questions. And when we do turn them into questions, we ask them questions because we were trained to ask questions a certain way. So I'm trained as an anthropologist. I look at an incident of violence and I immediately want to ethnographically, qualitatively understand it. And my question is, why as an anthropologist don't I want to map it? Why don't I want to quantify it? Why don't I want to assess it through institutions? And one of the things that makes you realize is that the big distinction between disciplines is actually a distinction between methods. It is not so much our conceptual frameworks that I think are irreconcilable. They're different, they're not irreconcilable. But what really separates our disciplines is that we believe there is a certain set of skills and methods that planners should have, that economists should have, that political scientists should have, that designers should have, that activists should have, that government financiers should have. So our program in its structure is designed to break this commonsensical separation. It's designed to take problems and places, work backwards, and give you a language and a vocabulary over a year to try and understand the questions the city poses and think about ways in which to engage with them. And you do that in order to kind of find your own practice. But you find it not without the discipline and the training and the work experience you bring in, but not reduced to that either. Right? So the part where we do this, how to speak a language across discipline and method, is what we call the commons. In many ways, you can think about it as the first part of the program. It's the first 8 weeks of teaching. It's 6 core concepts: identity and inequality, planning, sustainability, governance, economics, and infrastructure. Okay? And when you take those, there's no way to cut them into disciplines. And we don't want to cut them into disciplines. But for us, that first 2 months is the reason why we can ethically invite an interdisciplinary class. Because it's where we teach the economist how to think spatially. It's where we teach the financier how to think about what a biography and ethnographic narrative gives you. It's where you teach the anthropologist the importance of spatial mapping. It's where you teach the protester the importance of policy, and the public policy graduate the importance of protest. So when we invite you into this program and say we don't care what degree you've got, we don't care what training you've got, it's not that we actually then assume to know things anyways. It means we anticipate that you bring certain languages and need others. So the first 2 months of the program in the Commons are where, as a cohort, the 35 fellows learn how to speak each other's language. They learn how to talk across space and geography, across scale, across institution, across disciplinary context. And they also learn how to talk about method. And that's why in the Commons, for the first Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you're in class. But Thursday and Friday, you spend in wards and neighborhoods in the field in Bangalore. Because unless you can actually put those two registers of reading and seeing together, you can't build a vocabulary. So the Commons for us is the building of an interdisciplinary vocabulary of urban practice. It's an introduction to ways of speaking, knowing, and asking questions, linked with a set of core skill labs that talk to us about what is it that we need to be able to do and not just what we need to be able to know. And I'll say it very straight. A lot of our core skill labs are actually very basic. I need you to read, I need you to count, I need you to draw, I need you to listen, and I need you to quantify. in the actual curriculum, you dress these up and they become very sophisticated sounding things, but the basics about them are actually very key. And the thing is, most of us that get out of postgraduate education don't actually really robustly know how to read, count, draw, map, and listen. And those skills, which are so intuitive, are actually to do well very difficult. So the Commons is this place where you're both week to week getting a new concept, rooting it in the urban, thinking about the connections between these, and spending the second half of your week in actual neighborhoods in the city, writing, drawing, mapping, learning methods, making products, making films, shooting, thinking, quantifying, and basically trying to grapple and say, what does what I get taught Monday to Wednesday, what the hell does it have to do with what I'm seeing Thursday and Friday? And that dissonance is something that we set up very deliberately. And at the end of those 8 weeks, you have a moment where you're able to think for the second part of the course into what we think of the concentrations or the electives. And that is when we shift away from our initial idea of giving you a broad interdisciplinary floor to saying make some choices, pick some depth, enter into sectors. So the electives, and you will take 4 electives, 2 weeks each over a period of 4 months, 4 electives that are going to give you the chance to really get into the technical depth of a sector. Right? They're very different kinds. Some are theoretical, some are very applied, some are very professional. But many of the electives are also much more respectful of the existing professional and disciplinary domains that you come from. Now, why do I say that? I told you that we want to push interdisciplinarity, yet the electives are often either disciplinary, thematic, or sectoral. That's because we do recognize that while this is a fellowship, we want to give you a sense of the employment and practice landscape that you're going to come out into. And so the electives strike a balance. You can choose courses that continue to expand and push you in new ways. You can choose courses that add up and give you sectoral depth in some way for signaling. Those are choices that each of you will make very differently depending on where you are in your life. The program structure has that flexibility. The last element in the curriculum, I think that's important, is that when in the Commons you have place to answer to, in the concentrations you have projects to answer to. So all fellows enter into live IHS research and practice projects. So the Thursday and the Friday of the elective time, which is say 30% of your time, 2 days a week, you join actual teams at IHS that are doing research, that are in the field, that are doing projects, that have clients, large scale, small scale, and you apply for these projects and you have those fits. And part of that experience is for you to be able to imagine yourself in different practice scenarios. So once again, what you're taught Monday to Wednesday is constantly put against the reality of what you're able to do and grapple with Thursday and Friday. But part of the reason why the live projects are so important is because you're coming to this fellowship not just to learn a discrete set of things. You're partly coming to this fellowship to figure out what you want to be, what kind of practitioner you are, what your passions are, what you care about, what questions animate you, whether they're research or practice. You're also finding your modes of working. Where is it that you feel relevant? What scale do you want to work? Every one of us, to me, has within them the capacity to be structural as well as individual. An activist on one side of the police barricade line and a policymaker on the other side. These are not binaries, but these are choices that at different times in your life you make for different reasons. The fellowship's curriculum is designed to let you make a set of choices as you begin, for most of you in your early and mid-20s, or late 20s for some of you, to make decisions about your forms of practice in a new sphere called the urban. So these elements of the practice project are things that we can teach you, but we can't teach you. We can't teach you empathy. We can't teach you professionalism. We can't teach you hard work. We can't teach you disappointment. But without these things, your learning will be incomplete. So part of our curriculum structure is always the balance between the experiential and the taught. And we don't credit ourselves more than we should, or most of the time, sometimes we credit ourselves more than we should, to think that we can teach you everything that is to be taught, which is hence why throughout the program, the distinction between the Monday to Wednesday that we lead in every week and the Thursday and Friday that you lead in every week. And I think that balance is a very, very key part of learning at IHS. And it is at the heart of experiential learning in many ways. So let me stop there after having talked about the Commons, the projects, the electives, the practica, and encourage you guys to throw in some questions into the chat box using your invisible ink, because I can't see them. But my colleague Tanvi is going to unmute herself and she can see your chat. So she's going to read out the questions to me, which hopefully I'll be able to hear, and then I'll respond to them. So I'm happy to take specific questions about elements of the curriculum, particularly the commons, concentrations, etc. I'm also happy to take any general questions you have in thinking, whatever the hell you're thinking about right now, about the fellowship, about the application, etc., etc. Other than advice on life and love, you can pretty much ask me whatever else you feel like. Okay, so let's open it up to questions. You can type them in, and Tanvi, if you unmute yourself, and if you feel like that's not working, we're on WhatsApp, so you can also just WhatsApp into me on the side. Now we can back up.
Hi, Gautam. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
And you can see the questions people are typing in, right?
I can. As of now, there are no questions. So
Great.
if you would talk about anything else in particular, you can go ahead. Okay, wait, there is one question.
There's a classic rule by teaching, Tanvi. It's called the 90-second rule. And 90 seconds always pass between the last word by me and the first question. So this lot is just fast. Go ahead.
Okay, the question is, what's the scenario after the fellowship?
Sure. So think of a couple of kinds of scenarios. I'll be straight. This is not a placement guaranteed fellowship, which we say very clearly. But we give you a lot of support, both in terms of your internships and your projects, in terms of finding placements. So here's what we've got about 70 people go through this, right? So here's what they've done. One set of people come in and want to stay in either their sector or their discipline, but they use the fellowship in order to distinguish themselves from their peers. I'll give you an example. We had our first batch had an engineer who used to work for TCS. He came to us, he did the fellows program, and then he joined the Delhi Metro Rail Corporation. So he remained an engineer, he remained in mid-sized practice firms, but he started specializing in transport engineering firms because of the structural sense that he had. We had a journalist who came to us, who's now the lead urban reporter of the he's the lead urban reporter at the Hindu. We have who also came back and within journalism said, I'm distinguishing myself as someone who is urban. So one set of people remains largely in sector, but becomes distinct from their counterparts using an urban location as an edge. A second set of people use us to transition into the urban sector. So they start working in specific sector places of housing, of sanitation, of planning, of building in large-scale projects, etc. A third set of people use us to radically shift their practice, which means that they've been actually looking for the kind of practitioners they want to be, and many of them make decisions about the next phase of their life. Some of them have become organizers, others have become joined the development sector, some have made a big shift and joined public policy and joined the government. A fourth set of people are folks looking for clarity towards where they should go towards masters and PhD programs. So there's a whole chunk of people who go there. And they again use the year saying that I know I want to study things like this, but I don't know what it is that I'm looking for. Many of them come in and enter into research fields. So actually we've had folks go into places as different as, CBRE Richard Ellis working in Aurangabad right now on smart city implementation and public-private partnership bus contracts, like real solid large-scale implementation. We've had people go into the MKSS in Rajasthan and work in movement organizing. We've had people go into mid-sized architecture firms and large planning firms. We've had people go into research. We've had people go and start their own enterprises. And in every batch of fellows, we've incubated new ideas that have turned into Urban Play, which was a company that made board games for urban education on urban issues. And the first board game they made is an assignment in my class, actually. The other is starting an urban ecological company that builds sustainable terrace gardens as a type of sustainable planning. So there is a whole range of post-fellowship options. A lot of it will depend very much on what you bring into it and what kind of refraction or new trajectory you're looking for. So if that answers your question.
Move on to the next question.
Yeah.
Okay. It says, I'm a literary and cultural studies graduate from a liberal arts school. I was wondering what makes for a good application for the fellowship.
So my first advice is don't think that you're applying at a disadvantage because you're not in what you consider urban degrees, like either planning, architecture, design, things like that. So remember that you're in admission going to be read against other applications from the humanities, right? And every year we've had fellows that come from those backgrounds. So one of the things that I would say to you in your application is we want to see what interests you about taking your way of looking at the world, your archive, thinking of literary and cultural analysis. Why the city? What about the city? What do you think that looking at the city through text can tell us? Right? So what we want is a sense of you. We want a sense of what makes you curious, what questions you're asking, what you want to become. We're not looking for anything sophisticated as an argument about why literature is important for the city. Assume we already believe it. We believe it 100%. So give us a sense of your relationship to your training in literary and cultural analysis. Give us a sense of why urban areas excite you. Give us a sense. So when you write your essay, I would say, take a little bit of a risk. Talk about why should, let me give you an answer. If I'm going to think about sewage and sanitation, why would looking at sewage and sanitation through thinking about literary and cultural analysis, why would it look different from thinking about it through infrastructure engineering? You write me that, I'm desperate to read it. Okay, so you see what I mean? So come at it in some ways from leveraging your background as a strength and say, look, I look at the city in this way. Give us a sense of that. Give us a sense of questions that you have. Give us a sense of what urban means to you. And it'll be a really great application. And that's general advice for all of you. We're not in your application looking for conceptual arguments that show us how much you know. We are looking for a sense of the way you ask questions. We're looking for what you can't answer. We're looking for what you're struggling with. So don't try and impress us with neatly made arguments. Impress us with really complex questions and saying, I just don't understand why this happened. And I need to know more to understand why this happens, or what this is about, or what I can do about this. But give us more questions.
Okay, so the next question is, what kind of attestation do we receive at the end of the program?
You get a certificate. Okay, so it's important to be clear about this. IHS is in mid-regulation to becoming an institution with the right to give degrees, which means that the attestation you get is not a PGD, not a postgraduate diploma. It is not a degree. Okay? It is a certificate that you are given. You get a transcript, you get grades, and it looks like a taught program. Many of our graduates have used that transcript and grade to successfully apply, certainly abroad, to master's and PhD programs very successfully. But in the Indian higher education landscape, it will not be recognized as a certain kind of formal PGD training. So you should be very clear about that standing, which is why it's structured as a fellowship program.
Okay, the next question is a long one, so I'm going to read it out. It says, hi, I'm Prateek. I'm an environmentalist by education and practice. Urban environment is the sector which intrigues me the most. I have gone through the curriculum and seen environment being one of that. I want to join a research project which specializes on urban environment. So how can this fellowship help me? How is this course different from any MURP course and an environmental planning course in some other institutions?
Sure, it's a good question. So the way we think about the environment is not as something either that can be separated from all the other questions of urban practice and systems, which is why in the Commons you'll see that you will actually be taught in the environment in planning, in infrastructure, in identity, in sustainability, in economics, as well as in governance. Specific electives will look at parts of what are recognizable environment courses. Every elective that you see is going to have an environmental perspective. If you are comparing the course to an MURP, which is Master's of Urban Regional Planning, my answer would be that the perspectives and ways of looking that this course gives you are much broader. I've taught in planning programs. I have a degree in planning. I went to a planning school that was very, very broad in its understanding of planning. but still fundamentally it had a relationship with the city that came and understood it as form, infrastructure, system, and material environment. I think that we take quite seriously that when you think about the social or the environmental, for example, it isn't an elective you add on to what your core urban systems theory already is. So I think our perspective is different from both an urban and regional planning course and environmental management course. I think that in many ways, the kind of skills that you get here are more broad and more general. They cross more disciplinary lines. Where I think you're better off doing an urban and regional planning course or an environmental management or environmental planning course is that they give you a much deeper location inside the sector. We will not go into the same technical depth in some aspects, particular aspects of environmental planning as a 2-year master's in environmental planning would go into. So you should think about that. If you're at a place where you're very certain about the environment and you know the way you think about it and you want technical depth and a clear sectoral entry, then a 2-year master's in environmental planning is a better position for you. If you're in a place where you approach the environment and want to not see it narrowly and sectorally, where you want to actually locate the environment in a much broader understanding of the urban, then in that sense, we are a better program for you. So you should really think about where you are vis-a-vis your career and your interest in the environment, and then think about why you would come to us and not to a specialist environment program. Okay?
Okay, the next one is, when you said one can work on projects with IHS during internships, could you talk about projects that IHS is currently working on?
Sure. How much time do you have? So one simple thing to do is if you go on our website and you go under research and practice, you have the whole list of projects. There's about 60 of them, right? But let me give you some examples. So the project, I'll just give you examples of projects of last year. One project was the team where we are working with the government of Uttar Pradesh to redesign the outpatient department of 12 district hospitals in UP. Okay, that's one project. We work with housing rights movements in Ranchi and Indore to do technical training on planning for housing rights activists in Hindi, so that as activists, they're more technically sound in their campaigns. We have a project on disaster risk management, which are case studies of leadership of organizations that have talked about disaster risk, to think about what leadership models underlie successful risk management practices. We have a project on hungry cities that looks at the study of urban food systems, which fellows worked on last year, which is a comparative project with Jamaica, South Africa, Ecuador, and India, looking at the way in which urban food systems are organized and where they move. We've had projects we have a large Chennai office that works on building fecal sludge treatment plants for the government of Tamil Nadu. We're building India's 3rd and 4th FSTP in Coimbatore and Trichy. So fellows joined the actual implementation of a large government program with the physical building of those treatment plants as part of the project teams. We have had projects on archiving and curating the what is that word called? It's slipping me. The program of our Urban Lens Film Festivals. One of the fellows joined our media lab and worked. We had an open call for entries this year. So we got 1,700 entries for our film festival, and the project worked on. She was film studies graduate, worked on curating the program for that festival. So you're getting a sense, basically. So when you start moving through our 5 schools, typically there are projects. We had 29 projects that fellows could apply for. And because several projects required 2 or 3 fellows. So we had 29 projects that fellows applied for last year. And I imagine we'll have a similar number this year. And they range in scale from small-scale practice implementation to research, projects that are more fieldwork or less fieldwork, projects that are more data-heavy, projects that are more ethnographically heavy. So there's a diversity of methods, and it crosses pretty much all the sectors and disciplines that you come in with. So I can promise you, the other thing to look at is something on the fellows website. The list of projects from last year is there, so you will see all 30 of the projects the fellows did. I think that gives you a strong sense also of the range.
Okay, so the next question is, How are the finances placed during the fellowship? What is an average expense incurred by a fellow?
So obviously there's no tuition, right? You have a subsidized room and board system, which is 10,000 a month for 7 months. Admitted fellows can apply for a scholarship to waive this 10,000 a month for 7 months, and all fellows that suitably show financial need get that scholarship. So there isn't a limited number. It's just a threshold that we want to be satisfied that you have that financial need. You also have a subsidized meal plan at campus. Basically, you get lunch every day for, I don't know, Tanvi, if you remember what it is, but it's very little, essentially. And you, so basically.
Yeah, it's about, I think for the fellows, it's about 1,600 per month.
Right. And that 1,600 per month is morning breakfast, full lunch, and a 6 o'clock snack. Nice. So food is basically covered because your accommodation includes breakfast, right? So essentially what you're paying for is transport, your own social life, and dinner. So in Bangalore, which is fairly reasonable in many ways, I think you can actually get away with a fairly reasonable expenditure. But what I would suggest to you is that you have the contact of many fellows this year. They're the best people to ask. As you know, in a good Indian city, the expenditure on social life, transport, and dinner, depending on the life you want to live, can range a lot. But you can get by also with quite little. And remember that for fellows that demonstrate strong financial need, even above the scholarship for room and board, there is additional scholarships of a living stipend on top of that. But only a few fellows that demonstrate the severest financial need get to go.
Okay, the next question is, are we given a choice to select skill labs, or are we taught all skill labs over the course of the fellowship?
So your common skill labs are required, which means that there are about 4 that you have to take, after which you choose. So there is only a maximum limit of the number of skill labs you can take, but you decide which elective skill labs you take. So half and half. Our problem in the previous years has actually been that most fellows want to take more than the maximum number of skill labs allowed, and we have to fight a lot about that. But so I would say about 40% you have to take, that's linked to the common, and 60% you get to choose.
Okay, I'm moving on to the next question. It says, hello, I'm an architecture graduate and looking forward to getting my master's in urban design. What do you suggest studying from an Indian university and from some UK or US universities what would be more helpful? How much will they help in understanding urban contexts on local as well as global cities?
That's a big question. Okay, so let me try and not either be nationalist nor be flippant. So here's the deal. It depends on the kind of life you're setting up for yourself. To me, as someone who studied in the US, I will be honest and say in my experience, I struggled very deeply. I thought I got a very good education, but I struggled very deeply to feel that education's relevance for where I live and work. And I had no question in my mind that I would always live and work in India. It never occurred to me not to. And when I came back from my PhD, I found myself reteaching myself a massive amount because I felt that what I had taught just did not explain the cities that I was seeing around me. So I do believe that we are at a moment where I think that the ability to understand the complexity of Indian urbanization should and can actually really only be held in India. Now, the tension about that is the quality of institutions we have that do justice to that aim is not very high, and I'm being very frank. I will say, having been with IHS since it started and given the work that we've done, is I think that we do well in this regard. We have a very strong sense of rooting what we teach to respond to our situation. So I'll give you a quick example. When we teach economics, we lead with informality. When we teach infrastructure, we lead with actually existing septic tanks as opposed to the mythical engineering network that no one ever built. So we begin with the context of Indian cities. To me, a lot of training and a lot of people I see who've got degrees from the UK and the US I feel in many ways have often technically stronger skills, something that I just trying to correct in-house, but they don't have a relationship to the environments, and the concepts and theories they learn don't have a relationship to the environment that helps them use those skills. So I am at this moment a very strong proponent of saying that the value of what you learn elsewhere, you have to take with a little bit of a grain of salt. It's a personal opinion. And again, if you're choosing to live and build a global life where you want to, then please take into consideration that you do live in a real world where the US UK degree has much more mobility to build a global life. So if you would like to build that life, IHS is pretty global. But you know, the world is not yet so undone from 100 years ago that an Indian degree compares the same way. So make some choices depending on where you are. Intellectually and pedagogically, I will say from my own experience that I think we're at a time where the Western curriculum is not able to grasp Southern urbanism. And that's one of the core reasons IHS was set up.
So the next question is, I think, sort of in continuation with the earlier one. It says, how can the course be helpful for me as an architect? That's
a good question. It depends not so much, it depends on what kind of architect you want to be. And so I would ask you to flip question. If you're an architect who feels like they have a clear practice, what makes you curious about this fellowship? Think about that impulse. You're coming to a place that is deliberately telling you it doesn't further your architectural training, that it exposes you precisely to all that architecture stops looking at, that it pushes you out of the site in the building and the material environment, it pushes you out of your control. It tells you that all the skills you learned in 5 years of architecture are actually very narrow. Now, if something makes you want to come to us despite this, and there's some part of the kind of architectural practitioner you want to be that you're looking for, I would say think about that. Tell us about that. A good chunk of our fellows every year are architects, and they're typically architects who come to us to find a relationship with the city that is not about the site. They want to move scale from the building. They want to think about architecture in its relationship to money, culture, economics, inequality, caste, gender, and religion, and not think about it only as a technical skill. So I think that one of the things that you think about, and this is true for every discipline, not just architecture. So if you're looking for a way to rethink your training and rethink your practice because you feel like there's things that you see that you can't grasp from what you know, that's a good calling to heed. That's a good time for an architect to look to broader, let's say broader green grass on the other side of fences. Sorry, that metaphor really did not come out right.
Okay, should I move on to the next question?
Yes.
Okay, it says, do the certificate and transcripts hold credibility when applying for universities abroad?
Yes. Abroad, I can say confidently they do. So our graduates from our fellows programs have been admitted into RMIT in Australia, into the University of Toronto, into Cornell, into the Bartlett School in London, into TU Delft, into. So yes, abroad they seem to hold a lot of weight, which is ironic and slightly heartbreaking. But inside India, because of the grand regulations of the University Grants Commission, even if people wanted to, so they certainly recognize the value of the education, but they can't recognize the certificate.
Okay. The next is, thank you. I would really like to get in touch with you. May I have your email address? So if this is particularly regarding the UFP, then we have a special UFP email address which you can write to, which is ufp.info@ihs.ac.in. I'm going to repeat it again. It's ufp.info@ihs.ac.in. But
and if you need it, then my email is on the website. So Tanvi, thank you for trying to protect my privacy. But since all our apps are taking all our data, it's a lost effort. So my email is online. You can Google it. It's just gban@ihs.co.in. But I would encourage you, just because at this point the hecticness of some things makes my replies inconsistent and certainly late. If it is a UFP inquiry, try that email first.
Yeah. We also have 2 phone numbers listed on the website, and we are very prompt with addressing queries. So I suggest any UFP related queries, you can just give us a call on those 2 numbers. Okay, the next question is, does the fellowship offer help and support in internships in other countries?
So here's the way our internships work. We don't guarantee placements, but we guarantee internships. So we set them up. We typically have a list. This year we had a list of about 45 organizations, all of whom have accepted our interns, are happy to take them during the 2-month period. We have specific projects for them. We do not. We have no objection to people going abroad, and we've had 1 fellow in each year do so, but we don't, the provision of our guaranteeing an internship does not extend, because we can't make it, it's very dependent on people being able to afford the cost of that kind of internship, which is something we don't get into. So certainly if you would like to set up an option and look for it, we're happy to work with you on that. But we don't do it, we don't set up international internships. Our internships are all in India.
Okay, the next question is slightly long. I'm going to read it out. How immersive is the course within the city of Bangalore? Do fellows actually work with governing social sector institutions? If yes, which institutions are these? And in what capacity have the fellows worked before? Have they continued their association with these institutions after the fellowship?
So the fellowship is very deeply immersed in the city of Bangalore. So for example, I told you that for the entire Commons term, you spend 2 days a week entirely in wards and neighborhoods in the city. And those are wards and neighborhoods that we are engaged with all year. So you don't just show up in them. Those are places where ongoing projects continue. We also do case-based teaching in the city. So for example, if you're going to study infrastructure, then we'll spend a day with Hasirudalla. Hasirudalla is Bangalore's largest organization of waste pickers and waste entrepreneurs. And you'll spend the day basically at 6 in the morning with them, going around collecting and segregating waste, looking at the dry waste collection centers, working with them. If you're studying housing, then you'll work with Slum Jagatu and housing rights activists in Bangalore like Isa Karul Selva, who take you into communities that have been organizing. If you're working on questions of governance, then you will meet people from the urban local body, as well as the municipalities that IHS works quite closely with. So IHS is a national resource center with the government of India, but also is a knowledge partner for the government of Karnataka. So many of our work is with government departments. We also train government departments and government officers in very large numbers, about 1,000 a year across 8 states. So in many ways, you are integrated and connected to Bangalore's institutional landscape. Many people who are very active in Bangalore will come and give talks as part of our master classes. So for example, last year we had C. Ranganath, who was the ex-chief secretary. We had Isa Karul Selva, who's from the housing rights movement. We had Harini Nagendra, who writes about ecology in Bangalore and teaches at APU. So in many ways, and then outside this, the campus is a place which has a lot of interaction with the city through events, as well as its regular events, as well as its cornerstone events in the city. And we have long-term ongoing research projects in sites all over Bangalore, and engagements with those communities and neighborhoods. Many of them, we work with local partners, we work with the Institute of Science, we work with water, we work with Aragyam, we work with the Power Karmika unions. So so the range of actors across government, civil society, and the private sector is quite strong. And between our research and practice projects, between the teaching, the relationship to actual physical sites in Bangalore is also quite strong.
Okay, the next question is it also possible to live off campus in Bangalore during the fellowship?
It is not something that we encourage, and we would like to know reasons why you want to do it. And I think that one of the things, and the reason we don't do it is because we work very hard to ensure a place where all the fellows can be together outside the classroom. And single-handedly, every single time in the fellowship runs, one of the critical feedback is how valuable that learning and social space is. I mean, this is a community of fellows of very diverse social, ethnic, caste, religious, gender backgrounds, disciplinary backgrounds. It's a rare cohort. And I think that you would be underserved by not taking that offer. And I think that the reason why that offer is subsidized is precisely to make that possible. So it is possible if you make a case for it, and should you come to the interview stage, we can discuss it.
Okay. What are the timings every day during the program?
It is all day, every day. So it is really quite a fully taught immersive program. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 10 to 6. And Thursday, Friday is sometimes structured, sometimes not structured, sometimes you're in the field, sometimes you're out somewhere, sometimes you're in class. So much more open, but think of it like a proper full-time job.
Next question is, do we get to choose which project we'll be a part of?
You get to apply. And as much as possible, we match people's first preference. So people give first, second, and third preferences. Everyone gets either first, second, or third. We've never had a problem with that. Most people get there first. But for example, the project example I took of the team that's redesigning the outpatient departments of district hospitals in UP. Now, that project requires you to have a certain skill set, because the projects have real clients. There are real prerequisites of skills. So when you apply to them, several projects will make it clear that you need certain skills to be part of it, to produce certain kinds of work. So there are the prerequisites questions, and then there's the preference question. So I think last year, I think 70% got their first preference, and very few people got their third preference.
Okay. Next question is, finally, in a professional world, a candidate would be asked to specialize in a certain area. Where does a pass out of this course find himself or herself? And sorry for so many inquiries.
Well, I mean, I have no idea who's asking any. So until you told me that, I have no idea who's this question. You are a good questioner. So have no fear. No, it's so look. I think that actually the professional world is changing greatly in many ways. So I will say, think of two things. Think of the fact that you're coming in with certain education and training. So it's not like you're abandoning all sectoral expertise. And think of how this tops up or relates to that. So don't think of this program in isolation, right? You have to think about the sum total of what's on your CV. And I think in many ways, but before we started this program, we did interviews with 70 employers. Everyone we could think of across sectors, large, small, private, movement. And you'll be surprised actually how many of us said, look, we've stopped thinking that people's CVs tell us what they know. And what they want actually is a set of capacities and skills, particularly critical thinking and problem solving skills. And they want people who are trained solidly on methods. So we have actually, our experience of the last batches is that actually most employers have welcomed the fact that our graduates have this broad interdisciplinary skill set. They feel like they can move between the organization, they can move from project to project, they can move into new sectors. So I think that, IHS is banked on the fact that the new employment world actually is going to look for interdisciplinary folks. And I think that we see many professional practices that used to be very sectoral, now reorganizing themselves into interdisciplinary thematics and looking for people who have the ability to move and think laterally. So I would double down and put my bet on that.
Okay, so we have the last question. It says, can you elaborate more on the skills lab?
Sure. So skill labs are various kinds of ways to learn a core set of skills. So in the common term, the skill labs all happen as part of the practicum, and they are your core skill labs. So for example, you can have a skill lab on geospatial mapping. This is something we need you to know how to do. We need you to know how to do it by hand, not just on softwares with clicks. We need you to understand why are you mapping and what you're doing with it, which is why we don't teach methods separately. We teach them in relationship to the practical work you're doing. You're in a place, you need to understand it. And I need you to understand when should you map, not just how should you map. So the skill labs are the technical part of saying, okay, you've decided you need to make a map to understand something. Here's what you do. But do it alongside this kind of interview. So you need to do interviews. Now pick up this skill lab. So skill labs range from 3 days of intensive workshop mode to 2 weeks with 2 sessions a week to 1 whole day. And we look at writing, we look at mapping, we look at quantitative analysis, qualitative analysis, we look at geospatial analysis, we look at project management, we look at how to handle finance and budgets. We look at theatre and voice and movement. We look at research design. So it's a whole range of sets that people go through, and they change as you go from commons into electives. But you do, let's say, I would say about 10 hours a week of picking up core skills. You can place out of some. So if you've already done many courses on quantitative regression, you just take a quick test, show us that you can handle statistics and numbers, and you're good. And then you can focus on picking up things you don't know, which is how to do ethnography, how to do visual analysis, and how to make films. One of our most popular skill labs is film and video, right, which everyone uses no matter their discipline. You actually get taught how to shoot, you're taught how to think about visual methods. But again, not just taught how to pick up a camera and shoot, but taught what it means to look at something visually, why you present something visually instead of collecting data on it. So one of the key things to think about the way methods is taught as IHS is that methods are taught linked to particular inquiries. And the whole question is for you to recognize what a method gives you. And once you do that, is to learn technically how to do it. And that's a set of labs that you get out of.
Okay, we have one last question. Okay, I'm going to read that. Good evening. I'm an engineer by profession. I come from a technical background. I would like to know if there were any engineers in the previous batch.
Yes, there were. We had, I'm trying to remember how many there were. I think there were 3 or 4. Well, there were 3, and the 4th was trained as an engineer, but denounced it and denied it every time you asked her. So we don't call her an engineer anymore because she gets very upset. So yes, there were. So the IHS rule is that we don't let any discipline cover more than a certain percentage of the class, right? So for us, it would have been nice to have a couple more. So the 2 engineers that were there last time are now, one of them is doing an internship in a water and sanitation firm. And that's sort of, I think, where he's going to end up specializing. He's very interested in thinking about engineering and decentralized, what I call on-site services. So decentralized local sanitation solutions, everything from septic tanks to small bore wells, etc., etc. The other one has joined, is working and is doing work in a big, is interning with CBRE Richard Ellis, and is interested in actually moving away from engineering to large-scale planning and urban development. And so I was thinking about that move. So yes, you will have other engineers in the room. Some of them will admit it happily. Some of them will try and run from it, depending on how they felt about being engineers. The thing about being an engineer in India is that it's always 50-50 whether you did it because someone made you do it or you did it because you actually like engineering. So if you are either kind of engineer, you will get some content.
Okay, there's one more question. I think this should be the last question and we should close post this.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, 2 more. I'm a designer by education, and by virtue of my institute, I've learned in a very interdisciplinary environment. Do you think the fellowship will be a little repetitive, or would I gain something different?
So I don't know what you mean by interdisciplinary here. So it's hard for me to respond to that directly. So I will say this. I think that from my experience of those who've come to us from design, they have found 10% of it familiar, 20% of it things they thought they had done before, but they thought about differently, and 70% of it completely new. So from the design background, I wouldn't worry too much about repetition, but I would go back again and say, think about what made you want to apply. If you come from an interdisciplinary background, what makes you want to come to another interdisciplinary program, right? And so if you think a little bit about what's pushing you, what you're still looking for, that will help you be a little bit more specific about the kind of interdisciplinarity you want. It may well be that, for example, you're interdisciplinary relative to design, but you never studied public finance. You never studied government, you never studied law, you never studied caste, you never studied gender, you never studied violence. So if that's the sense of what you feel like is still going, then maybe, interdisciplinarity is a question of degrees. So if your idea is to think about, so articulate for yourself, why this program now for you? Is it about scale? Is it about new sectors? Is it about more practice from the concept you already know? But I will say that we anticipate for everybody a little bit of repetition. But I have not felt that repetition is of any degree that is bothersome, either to us or to the people taking it.
Okay, we have no.
Last question. We
No, we
questions?
don't have any questions. No.
Okay, perfect. So guys, thank you very much for your patience more than anything else. You are truly Desi urbanites who know that nothing works exactly when it's supposed to in our dear cities. But we have jugadoed our way through this and gotten some interesting questions out. So good luck. I hope many of you apply. I hope many of you got the word. And do think a little bit about one last thing I'll say. Do think about what makes you want to apply to this fellowship. So don't just think about what it can give you. Think about why you are motivated to apply at this point. I think it'll answer a lot of questions for you. Because in the end, this fellowship has to make sense and fit into your life where you are now. Nothing is a technically absolute good or bad thing. It has to be good for you, right? And I think the more frank the discussion you have with yourself about that, the better fit it will be. And certainly in the interview, that's what we're going to ask you straight up. Why you? Why now? Why here? Right? And you should have a sense of that. And the more you communicate that in your application, the stronger an application it is. Okay, so sounds good. So everyone have good days wherever you are, and do tune into the other webinars. And I think, Tanvi, I'm back on April 3rd, right? If folks need anything else.
Yeah. Also, just a note, we are having a special webinar tomorrow between 5 to 6, where our faculty, Neha Sami, is going to take you through the application form. So if you have any specific queries regarding the form, you should definitely tune in tomorrow, or any UFP related queries as well. So tomorrow between 5 to 6. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Gautam.
You're welcome. Bye, guys. Take care.
Bye.